has presented 5 budgets, but this one perhaps was the toughest of them all, given the pressures on the fisc, the agrarian crisis, the job scare, but most of them all, the impending elections. But even his harshest critics will concede that this may have been an election budget. This certainly wasn't an irresponsible one. In conversation with us right here at ET Now is the Chief Architect of Budget 2018 and the Honourable Finance Minister in the Government of India, Mr. Arun Jaitley. Thank you very, very much, sir, for speaking to us. Now that enough time has gotten done and a lot of print space and on-air time has been spent analysing the budget, was it politics or economics at play when you sat down to budget making this year?
Well, I think if it's sound economics and it addresses those segments of the economy which need the support the maximum, then it can blend itself also with good politics. For instance, today you have the infrastructure sector which is doing well. We need to continue to invest. That keeps the economy moving.
That's right.
It helps the economy, it helps us in politics. Services are doing reasonably well. We are broadly in the 8% plus category always in services. Of late, manufacturing has somewhat picked up after the slowdown phase is over.
Yes.
But what was stressed is agriculture. And therefore, there has been across the country an impression that the farmers need more support. And obviously, therefore, it was an economic necessity in this country to support the farming sector. And supporting the farming sector could blend itself with politics also. So I think this is a case where economics and politics reconcile with each other.
So that's perhaps why people are tempted to say this is an election budget, because obviously there is a thrust on the agrarian resolution. Many people believe it was shaped by the Gujarat verdict. Was it?
Well, let's first of all be very clear. We won the election in Gujarat. Even in the rural areas, out of the 4 areas in Gujarat, South Gujarat, Central Gujarat and North Gujarat, we led in the rural areas. It's only in Saurashtra, in the rural areas, that we trailed. And the Saurashtra problem was a combination of several factors. You see, Saurashtra was originally an area where there was no water. It was during Mr. Modi's tenure as Chief Minister that the Narmada water was taken. And suddenly, Saurashtra has become more fertile. The milk revolution, which was away from Saurashtra, also got carried to Saurashtra. So Saurashtra has seen a lot of affluence coming in.
True.
Now, this year you've had bumper crops in cotton and so on, and the prices collapsed.
Yes.
And therefore, there probably was a mismatch between the MSP and the crop itself. That was the Saurashtra problem. And I think in a democracy, if a particular region gives a message that this is a problem, a responsive government must always respond to a message.
Fair point, and I don't think anybody will dispute
You
that.
can't say, well, you've given a message, but I'm too arrogant, I won't listen to you.
And arrogance never pays in politics, and we know the other side has paid a price for this. But I will ask you this question, and this has to be, I want to get, talk about healthcare and agriculture and all of that in just a bit, but want to get the market reactions out of the way. Thursday, when you presented the budget, there was sanity in the markets. They fell, but then there was sanity. Friday is when the big crash happened. Did it surprise you, or were you anticipating a reaction like this?
Well, I think, let's be very clear. This is a combination of several factors. When you impose even a 10% long-term capital gain,
That's right, yes.
I grandfathered whatever was the existing protection. Most people were expecting this to come sooner or later.
True.
And expecting this to come, I think there would always be some reaction in the market, because some people may try and book whatever is their profit, because future profits are going to be now subjected to capital gains itself. So something was bound to happen. Also, let's not forget that on Friday, there was also a kind of a crash going on in the global markets, which emanated from all Asian markets. So all over Asia, there was a crisis, and it spread to the world. And therefore, it was a combination of our capital gains along with the global impact that was taking place itself. Thirdly, I am told there was some erroneous rumor which was being spread that the grandfathering facility is not available to foreign financial institutions, which is actually incorrect. And I had clarified that we didn't have any of this in mind. It's uniformly applicable to all.
So you have taken the tough call, and I think the Prime Minister also set the stage for it when he said everybody needs to contribute to nation building and taxation. You've taken the tough call of imposing long-term capital gains tax. Many people believe you've done it in a non-disruptive sort of a way. But I want to ask you this question. Having taken the call, what is your assessment of the revenues that will accrue from there? And are you assuming here that the market participants' behavior will continue to be the same? Because many people believe investments were happening because there was an incentive of no LTCG.
You see, let's be very clear. There are stages in an economy where you go out of the way and offer incentives for people to come and invest. Even if some of them may actually be a little discriminatory kind of incentives. For instance, let's see, there was a period in the 1990s when we needed foreign exchange. We were encouraging the Mauritius route, the Cyprus route, the Singapore route.
That's right.
Even if it was round tripping of our own money which was coming back. So it wasn't really genuine foreign investment. A large part of it was round tripping, and we knew it and we decided to look the other way. Now, there was a time in 2015-16 where I felt confident about the Indian economy, and we were being told the moment you rewrite those treaties,
money will stop flowing in.
Money will stop flowing in. Nothing of the kind happened. I remember an editorial in 1998 written by an eminent columnist who said India won't see a single dollar coming in after the nuclear test. And finally, when we calculated the total impact of the nuclear tests, it turned out to be some 500 million worth of investment, which adversely suffered, which stopped. Everything else went on usual. The world reconciles. Ultimately, the world recognizes the size of India, the fact that we have a sound economy, the fact that we have the fastest growing economy. So how well our companies are doing, how well our economies are doing, what are the kind of returns the Indian markets are going to offer, all this will decide in the long run the kind of investment. Markets moving up and down for a couple of days, I think is something which we've now learned to live with.
But one of the things that people are talking about, and I just want to finish these questions on markets, is that while you have introduced LTCG in a non-disruptive sort of way, you've offered grandfathering, why have you not done away with the STT? Does it need to coexist?
Well, I think these are questions which can arise, but then they...
are you open to a review?
I'm not saying that. At present it remains, and therefore I don't want to give any cause for any speculation. Even when the short-term capital gains was there, the STT existed with that.
But sir, the other concern is that while you've taken a call, and you're right, that there comes an age in the economy when you've got to take these calls to tax things that weren't taxed before, and you've got to undo some of what was done in the past. Is it fair to assume that you have perhaps taken the first step to bringing equities and taxation there at par with other instruments? Are we perhaps seeing the first signs of a larger step that
you see? There are people who speak in terms of all asset classes being treated at par, because if you have one asset class which is preferred one, then you find correspondingly investment into the other areas, whether it's manufacturing or it's property, real estate, not adequately taking place. But I don't want to add to any market speculation, because I would like to see the market stabilize. And for the present, this is the decision, and this decision remains as it is.
Was one of the decisions to impose LTCG also done with an intention to temper the irrational exuberance that was being seen in the markets?
No, I don't think that's the cause. I think that one of the rationales was there are small investors who needed to be protected if they make some money. Let them pay a little, either no tax, and therefore the small investors who earn up to ₹1 lakh a year from the market were all exempted. And the others, we found that the investors, whether domestic or international, were very large, wealthy people. And therefore, in today's set of situation, to continue an exemption for the wealthiest
is against the grain of what you're trying to do.
Is against the grain, and particularly when you need revenue for all these social sector schemes.
But do you believe the market is perhaps not one, not two, but many steps ahead of fundamentals? And because of the steps that you've taken as far as demonetization is concerned or GST, we are seeing formalization, the financialization
I think
of the
the
economy.
Indian market is eventually matured. It has withstood. It withstood the impact, as I said, of the nuclear test. It withstood the impact of demonetization. It withstood the impact of GST. Now it's withstood all this. It's strengthened beyond a point, and it is running as high. It's only those with some myopic vision will say, "Oh, one day the Sensex fell. This is a no confidence in the economy." That's a very myopic analysis.
And a political one at that. I will take focus away from markets and talk to you about something that I think proponents of government investment will say and will cheer the death of fiscal fundamentalism, quote unquote. They are those who are warning of you of consequences, but I think by and large people have made their peace with the fact that this was a disruptive year due to the GST. You would give yourself some elbow room on the fiscal deficit. It's the revenue deficit that's worrying a lot of people. 1.9 to 2.6% people worry, is this wasteful expenditure that you're perhaps going to oversee?
No, it's not. Nothing is wasteful. Let's be very clear. The revenues also are moving up quite satisfactorily, because first of all, as far as fiscal deficit is concerned, you must appreciate that this is the first time that I have been unable to meet my 3.2 target.
That's
Otherwise,
right.
I've
Yes.
met the target in the last in every year.
Right.
And one of the principal reasons I have not been able to meet the target, I had an amount which came less from the
True.
auctions of the spectrum. The dividends were less from the CPSCs. The RBI dividend was less. And therefore, cumulatively, this became a fairly large amount. We covered up a lot of it with extra disinvestment, with some budgetary savings, and so on. But at the end of the day, what also made a very significant difference was the fact that I had only 11 months GST for this
revenue.
year.
Yes.
Now, if you have 11 months GST and 12 months expenditure,
There will be a mismatch.
then there is a statistical slippage which has taken place, because you had 1 month less. If I had 1 month more of GST,
And the final figures may actually look different from what they are right now. But sir, in your budget next year, you are expecting a tax revenue growth of 16%. Are you placing too many bets on the GST? It hasn't stabilized just yet.
you
What
see,
is the
I'll tell
optimism
you,
coming from?
as far as direct tax is concerned, we are well ahead of the 16%.
True. Yes.
The 14-15% I had anticipated, I am 18.7% ahead. So direct taxes are covering up for it. As far as the GST is concerned, I think that's the elephant in the room, in the sense that nobody knows which way it's going.
True.
So far, we are having teething trouble putting all the mechanisms for anti-evasion in place. But eventually, once we are able to do that, I'm quite certain that the GST revenues will increase. And my fundamental faith in that is based on the fact that if your revenue base,
Is going
which
to
has
expand.
increased significantly from 64 lakhs, you are up 1 crore plus.
Compliance will
And
get
the-
better.
Obviously, and with every day the number of assessees are adding, and if compliance gets better, then surely I'm going to have a much higher GST
To
revenue.
ask you a tricky question, is it time to now shift to stick than carrot on GST?
No, I think, you see,
You're too large-hearted to not say yes, but I'm just asking.
I think the policy in the case of taxation really has to be to keep nudging the taxpayer. Look at the way we've brought success as far as direct taxes are concerned. We've tried we've had ST schemes, we've had income tax people going and raiding people.
True.
You've had tax rate cuts, you brought the rate down to 5%. You had demonetization, you had GST, you had all those SMSs being sent to people. And all this nudging means you suddenly find that your tax base in terms of numbers increases, in terms of quantum starts increasing.
True.
And therefore, I think in the case of the GST also, there will be some anti-evasion measures which will be required. Is there an element of stick in that rather than the carrot? Probably a little bit, but not beyond a point.
And it's perhaps warranted.
It's not needed. You see, one of the fundamental principles is that you never use a hammer to kill a fly.
That's right.
So because the extent of the problem is what can be solved with a little bit of nudging and strictness, you just don't make it industry versus the taxation department. That won't be a very sensible idea.
And that's a mature approach indeed. So one of the things that I think is a huge success in your budget is the fact that you haven't given in this urge to splurge. Even in an election year, you've reined in expenditure, which is likely to grow at just 9.1% against a nominal GDP growth of 11.5%. The flip side to that is that public investment resources will be limited. How will you then spur growth? How will you then call this a growth budget?
You see, growth in the last few years has come substantially from budgetary resources itself.
Yes.
Therefore, now you have to also defend besides budget. Now that the economy is moving, you have to depend on budgetary resources, you have to depend on extra budgetary resources. You have to now also see private sector investment picking up because credit has started picking up. And therefore, I do see a lot of private sector investment now picking up.
And that will be an engine of growth as well. So one of the things that the economic survey talks about, and the budget also refers to that, is the higher crude oil prices. You have leveraged a low price regime in the past, and you've tried to keep the fiscal balance by leveraging that. How do you intend to deal with crude that's rising? And just to put it in perspective, it's gone up by 40% in the last 6 months.
You see, it depends on what the range is. If it remains in the current range, and I yesterday said that we are almost on the outer verge of the range itself, is something which we can still absorb and take. But if it pierces through that, then of course the impact on the economy is going to be more difficult.
Your predecessor, I want to move to the mainstay of the budget, which is the healthcare scheme. And congratulations on getting something like that, because as people who've spent times in hospitals, this was much warranted. Your predecessor, Mr. Chidambaram, has called the healthcare scheme a kite being flown without the string, because an ambitious scheme like that cannot not have the required allocations. You're starting with 2,000 crore rupee worth of allocation. Politics set aside, how much do you realistically believe a scheme like that
this
requires?
scheme which was envisaged by the Niti Aayog, today we have a statement from the public health experts in the Niti Aayog that they anticipate at least 8 to 10,000 crores of expenditure. And I have said in my budget speech that in the course of the year, whatever extra expenditure is required, we are going to give.
The Niti Aayog has also said it will require a premium of 1,000 to 1,200 rupees for a 5 lakh coverage. Are you being too, is the assessment too conservative?
I think let them work, because once the volumes increase, the per capita expenditure comes down. And therefore, you see, everybody doesn't need hospitalization. There are more healthy people than sick people in a system. And therefore, it's only in the extreme cases that people use hospitalization. And therefore, I think a scheme like this, we'll have to see what the insurance companies charge. There'll be competition between the insurance companies. And we'll eventually we'll know what the final rate is.
So volumes and competition should take care of the premiums there. I want to talk to you about the agrarian resolution that you spoke about, and I think most people have cheered the fact that you've read the message and you've acted upon this. The MSP increase on the Kharif crop, cost plus 50%. A lot of critics say that this will disincentivize production at a lower cost, will hamper inefficiency. I know a politician and you will not agree with this.
Well, you see, a contrarian argument is always available for any viewpoint. The question is, let us look at the plight of the farmer itself. Today, his input costs have gone up. His profitability is very marginal. His quality of life is extremely modest, if not poor. And if to do away with these inequalities in society, do we have to improve the quality of life or not? Where is the extra GDP in India going to come from? It's going to come from people who don't work. Women working is going to be higher GDP. Eastern parts of India contributing is higher GDP. India's agriculture and rural India contributing more is going to be higher GDP. And if the purchasing power of the Indian farm sector increases, it's not only the farmer's income, it's going to have a spiral effect on all other segments of the economy.
And there cannot be this absolute economic principles being applied to the pain that one is seeing on Indian farms. But do you fear this will be inflationary? You have a higher food subsidy burden at 1.69 lakh crore.
Well, we have a higher food subsidy burden, but the impact of the inflation on this, experts tell me, if at all, is going to be marginal.
I will ask you a question on your divestment figures. You've obviously overshot them, and this is the first time in history that a government has done so. Some people will say it's the ONGC, HPCL kind of a deal. When you could do 1 lakh crore this year, why are you being conservative at 80,000 crore rupees
No,
next year?
even this year the target was only 72,000.
Yes.
And therefore, towards the end, we expedited it for the reason that we wanted to cover up for the shortfall in the non-tax revenues itself this year. And I think the department deserves to be congratulated, the officers concerned. They did a very fine job for this.
Have you taken baby steps towards what many people have criticized you for, which is labor reforms? You know, many people say labor reforms are not being done. Have you taken baby steps? Because rolling out the fixed term contractual jobs across industry segments has got a huge thumbs up from a lot of experts. Are you going to concede that you've taken that into cognizance and moved on that?
You're right, it's a baby step, it's a small step. I do believe that we must look at the Indian trade union movement. India's trade union movement is not a destructive movement. And therefore, it's not a movement which is indulging day in and day out and lay out strikes and bunds and so on.
True.
There used to be a phenomenon in the 1960s and 70s which is over. By and large, Indian trade unions are willing to sit across the table and sort issues out. And this is across the spectrum's trade unions. And therefore, to enter into confrontation in an area where reforms are inherently more difficult. And I think, therefore, it's equally important that we carry the whole system with us. There is always a time and a place for every reform.
But a baby step nonetheless. You have taken other very important steps, and I think that's again a feedback that you got on jobs and you've acted on that. Special package for textiles, footwear, a reduction in statutory EPFO contribution by new female employees, contributing to the EPFO yourself. The intention obviously is to create those jobs. Do you believe these are enough, and will these deliver on jobs?
Well, I think in India, jobs will be created and continue to remain created, both in the formal and the informal sector. And therefore, once the Indian economy comes back to that 7.5–8% plus situation, I think the kind of economic activity that it generates itself is going to create a lot of jobs.
A final question on the economics of the budget before I take two quick questions on the politics. What would you say to corporate India that believes you have encouraged and incentivized the MSMEs but not the big guns? They were hoping you would move and walk the talk on corporate tax
Well,
rate.
first of all, I don't think the big guns are really adversely impacted because the SMEs, that's a package which I could afford.
True.
And therefore, 99% of the companies are covered by the 25% tax. And the 7,000 companies which are not covered by it are the ones who are actually paying only 22%.
So they have no reasons to complain. It
They
hasn't
have no
gone to
reasons
25.
to complain.
A quick political question. Rahul Gandhi said it has taken you 4 years to recognize the agrarian mess. That's what he tweeted. He also talks about this bus ek saal jibe. What do you make of it?
See, I'll tell you, this bravery on the Twitter, or Twitter Bahadurs as I call it, is a new generation of politics which has picked up. Now, wasn't the crop insurance scheme launched 2 years ago? Has he forgotten that?
And the soil...
And the soil health cards launched. Now, these are all schemes. Every budget affords some area or the other to help these segments. I'm sure every budget in the Congress government also must have made a modest effort itself, whether it had an impact or not. And therefore, this budget, we took a major step. I think the Congress apparently is a little nervous about this step. They see the political fallout of this step.
There are reports of your allies being miffed. The Sena wants to be in the government but wants to act like an opposition. Now the Akali and the TDP are raising a few voices there. There is criticism that you're taking your allies for granted.
No, I don't think so. I don't think there's any problem with the Akalis at all. The Akali BJP alliance is very strong. The TDP has always has an issue because of the Andhra Pradesh Reorganization Act. Now, Andhra Pradesh Reorganization Act is not an issue which is addressed in the budget.
Sure.
That's being already addressed independent of the budget, and we stand by every commitment that we made to the state of Andhra Pradesh.
There is a lot of buzz of early elections and this budget catering to that. Will you rule out elections in 2018?
But I have not heard of any such rumor.
Mr. Jaitley, will you concede that given the track record, the 5 budgets that you've presented, this was the toughest of them all?
Well, it was difficult because one had to blend fiscal prudence with the economic requirements of the economy itself. And I think this balancing act was extremely difficult under these circumstances.
Finally, is India's finance minister getting a good night's sleep after presenting budget 2018?
No, I always sleep well.
Thank you very much for speaking to us. It's a pleasure talking to you. And after the Modi government presented its last full-year budget in office, it's time to take stock, decode the budget and understand the fine print and talk to one of the sharpest critics of this budget. And who better than former Finance Minister Chidambaram in conversation with us right here at ET Now. Thank you very much for being with us. You did a press conference immediately after the budget. You had a column that came after and you spoke about courage. But enough time has lapsed and I want to ask you, and you wear many hats, and one of those hats is a politician's hat, and one expects you to criticize the budget. You are a member of the opposition. But that set aside, will you concede that this has been a balancing act of sorts in very difficult times?
That depends on how you define difficult times. The difficulties are evident. If they had done a rescue act or even a partial rescue act, I would have been happy. But this budget does nothing to rescue the economy from the situation in which it finds. It has done nothing for investments, nothing for savings, nothing to increase demand. So why do you say that this is a balanced budget? All I say is your so-called rural thrust is, according to me, a jumla. Your so-called healthcare thrust is the biggest jumla I've seen. You announce what you call the world's largest government-funded healthcare program. You go through the budget at a glance, you go through your expenditure statement, and you find it's the world's largest unfunded government announcement.
I will come to that in just a bit, but you started your piece by saying, you started your comments by saying that they haven't done the balancing act. I know it's good to be fiscally prudent. I would have lauded them more had they stuck to 3.2, but this is an exceptional year. They've rolled out a GST, they have revenues for only 11 months, expenditure of 12. So they've just about breached the fiscal deficit at 3.5%. A lot of people say, at a time like this, when there is such a tough economy to manage, does it make any sense to be a fiscal fundamentalist?
You set for yourself a target of 3.2. You have now arrived at a revised estimate of 3.5.
That's right.
The 0.3 gives you about 54,000 crore. Now tell me, what have they used this 54,000 crore for? If they'd used the 54,000 crore for a specific purpose, with a specific goal in mind, I would have accepted the breaching of the fiscal deficit target. But this 54,000 crore has gone into a deep hole. I said to this 3.5, you must add the 37,000 crore that they got from ONGC. You must also add the 80,000 crore that they are getting from the banks.
So, would you have perhaps been all right if they had breached it to 3.5% this year and kept their target of 3% next year? Because what they've effectively done is they're going to be 3.3% next year, eventually get to 3% only in 2020. Is that something that's bothering you?
This 3% target is something we should have achieved, but for the international...
In 2008.
But for the international financial crisis, this 3% target should have been achieved, I think, in 2008, 9 or 9, 10. Actually, we achieved 2.7% in 2007-8. Be that as it may. ever since this government came, it has shifted the goalpost every year. Even if I have to concede that 3.5% was necessary, there is no answer to my question, where did this extra 54,000 crore go, along with the 37,000 which the ONGC gave them? I know where the 80,000 went, so forget it. So 54,000 plus 37,000 is a 91,000 crore. Where did this 91,000 crore go?
Are you saying this is all
Did it
wasteful
go?
expenditure?
Did it go into public investment? No. Did it go into stimulating aggregate demand? No. Where did it go?
So are you saying it was all wasteful expenditure?
Yes.
Let me talk about a number here. The expenditure growth has been reined in at 9.1% versus a nominal GDP growth of 11.5%. Many people believe this is going to be done at the cost of public sector investment. As somebody who is fiscally prudent like you are, you decisively tried to control the fisc when you came back to the finance ministry. At least, is this something that impresses you, that they haven't gone for a splurge in an election year?
They had no option. Even with this level of expenditure, they have breached the fiscal deficit target. If they had expended more, they would have breached it more. And that would have had serious consequences for the interest rate, for bonds, for foreign direct investment, serious consequences. As it is, I warned even before the finance minister rose to make a speech. I said, the economic survey has laid out the diagnosis. Let's see what the finance minister does. And I said, if you fail the test of fiscal consolidation, you will pay a very serious price.
But can a growing economy, can a developing economy like ours be obsessed with fiscal deficit at the cost of investments? Private sector is not investing at all.
But that is again your fault. Your policies do not encourage private sector to invest. It's your fault. Therefore, you can't blame the private sector for not investing because of the policies that you are following, the climate you have created. You have created a climate where no private sector industrialist wants to invest in India. He would rather invest abroad.
But that investment slowed down a while back, even before they came to office. Yes, the expectation was that they would come to office and private sector would begin investing. You're right, that hasn't happened.
What happened in 2012-13 and 13-14 is history. I was pulling back the economy from where it had got a bit derailed. I was pulling back the fiscal deficit. I was pulling back the current account deficit.
Okay, let me just talk to you about the future outlook, and they are projecting tax revenue growth of 16%. Direct taxes, they insist, are up 18%, and that will carry on. The elephant in the room, even the finance minister accepts and concedes, is GST. They're obviously placing a lot of bets on the GST. Do you, as somebody who's worn that hat before, accept, and do you expect the GST to stabilize? Why are you so skeptical about revenues going forward?
I'm not making any predictions on revenues. All I'm pointing out is their assumptions on tax revenues for 2018-19 are extremely aggressive. Income tax is expected to grow at 19.8%. GST is supposed to jump 67%.
Because they expect that it will stabilize. They expect that it will be compliant. I interviewed the finance minister earlier today,
you should have thought through all that before you launched GST. It could. Next year they're projecting 7,43,900 crore. It's a 67% jump. But somebody must explain to us how this jump is going to happen.
Because I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why they put in this figure. We questioned the finance minister on that, and they believe, the government believes, the finance minister believes, that now the carrot approach alone can't work, and the traders will have to be nudged. They will have to be anti-evasion means in works to have GST compliance. Why are you skeptical?
See, this is a government which applies muscular, militaristic approach to everything. From Kashmir to taxes, their approach is muscular.
I want to turn focus away from the numbers and what we're talking about into the mainstay of the budget. At least that's what they claim it to be, and that's the rural push. A lot of commentators out there have said that MSP on cost plus 50% is not just going to be inflationary, it will disincentivize production at a lower cost and may even hamper efficiency. Can we apply principles of economics when there is such rural distress?
When the UPA was in power, we believed that price was the best signal to the farmer, and we therefore gave generous increases in MSP. When the NDA came to power, they reversed that. In the first 3 years, they squeezed MSP prices in order to control inflation. They may have succeeded in taming down inflation, but that drove the farm sector into acute distress. The farm sector has still not come out of that distress. Then they realized that they were wrong. In the 4th year, they tried to become generous. And now they say we're going to give cost plus 50%. Unexplained issues. Which cost?
They talk about A2.
Dr. Swaminathan has asked the question, which crops have you given cost plus 50%? You don't name the crops.
So then in principle you are not opposed to what they have done.
And
you are basically pulling
believe,
them up for perhaps being a little too late with it
and
not being clear enough.
I've always believed that price is the best signal to the farmer. And instead of giving this subsidy and that subsidy, the best is to give him a remunerative price.
So you are not someone who shares the concern that this will be inflationary. You're happy that there's a higher food subsidy burden, even if that means it may be inflationary, because the health of the India farmer matters as well.
No, listen, giving a MSP price and subsidizing the consumer are not mutually inconsistent. You can give the farmer, farmers producer prices. You give the farmer a good MSP. If you want to protect the vulnerable consumer, you subsidize the consumer. In fact, the National Food Security Act, to a large extent, secures the vulnerable section. It also subsidizes the vulnerable section. I don't oppose a generous MSP, but I'm saying you have not done it. If you have done it, you have not explained what you have done.
Are you at least, as somebody who's fiscally prudent, are you at least happy with the fact that they haven't doled out farm loan waivers like some of the state governments have?
They don't have the money to do that.
If they had the money, would you have preferred that?
That will depend upon the situation. In 2008, there was a situation when we had to waive the loans of farmers, and we did it consciously, and I'm proud that we did it.
Do you believe that situation arises now?
It has arisen in states, which is why UP, Punjab, Maharashtra, and a couple of other states have done farm loan waivers. You have sent 12 companies to insolvency.
That's right.
What is the haircut you're going to take there? The first 3 cases of haircut, smaller cases, one is a big case, the haircut has been 80%. If all the 12 companies eventually go into insolvency and not resolution, and you take a haircut of 80%, how much is that going to mean? So don't treat farmers as a class that does not deserve sympathy, and only the industrial class deserves sympathy, the corporate sector deserves sympathy. If there is distress, you must give relief. Whether there is distress, to what extent they are entitled to relief is a matter of judgment, the objective situation. But as a principle, I believe that where there is distress, government is obliged to extend relief.
No, as a matter of ideology and principle, I agree with you. Let me just turn focus to the first thing that you said, and that's the healthcare scheme, the world's largest government.
The world's largest Jumla.
Where is that word Jumla being picked
I
up
don't
by the
know.
Congress party from? But I'm going to ask you. You have called it, it amounts to a kite being flown without a string,
Yes.
because proper allocations haven't been
I have
made.
got the budget at a glance.
Yes, yes.
I have got the speech. Show me
They're
one
talking
line.
about a very, very meagre allocation of 2,000 crore rupees. The Niti Aayog
No,
today
no, the
clarified-
2,000 is not for this scheme. 2,000 is for an existing scheme.
Yes, but they are talking about a budgetary, they'd say that a support of about 8 to 10,000 crore rupees
How?
will be required. That's the back of the
What
envelope
kind of
calculations.
arithmetic is that? I have done my homework and I'm willing to give you the numbers.
I'll just come to the numbers, but will you deny this is a political masterstroke?
It's a political jumla and people will see it as a political jumla after 6 months.
You don't think health for all is a political masterstroke?
It is, but this is not the masterstroke. This is a gimmick.
The Niti Aayog today clarified, the finance minister told us earlier today that it will require 8 to 10,000 crore rupees, and when
I have
it's
seen
required,
3 numbers.
I will raise that amount.
I have seen 3 numbers from 3 officers for the government. Someone said we'll do it for 8,000 crore. Someone said it will cost us 10 to 12,000 crore. A third person said it will cost us 20,000 crore. None of these numbers is right. Please, let's start with the...
But you were working with very high levels of premium.
I'm not. I'm telling you, once you say 10 crore families will be covered, you can't pick and choose. Everyone has to be covered on day one.
But not everybody is ill.
Wait a minute. Everyone has to be covered on day one. And you've promised 5 lakh coverage. I'm saying let's assume the average claim is 1/10 of that. Average is 1/10 of that.
5,000.
That is 50,000 rupees is the average claim. If 50,000 rupees is the average claim, there are only 2 ways to pay the hospital. One, pay as you go,
That's right.
or you cover it by insurance, right? If you pay as you go, 50,000 average claim, it will cost you 5 lakh crore, which I think is the outer limit. The extreme situation, not likely to happen. If you cover it by insurance, at current rates of premium, it will cost you per family between 5,000 to 15,000 rupees. Let's assume they beat down the premium by arm twisting the public sector.
But they believe that the premium is likely to be 1,000 to 1,200 rupees.
Wait a minute.
And competition and
You can
volumes.
believe whatever you want to believe. First you say, we are going to share 60%. Somebody says government
60% by centre and 40% of states.
Which state has agreed? Have states come on board? Therefore, we don't know what the premium is going to be. I said at current rates of premium, it is going to cost 5,000 to 15,000 per family. Let's take an average of 10,000 rupees per family. At 10,000 rupees, if you want to cover 10 crore families, it's 1 lakh crore. Premium alone. Now, I don't know what the insurance companies are going to come up with. You have an idea. You don't even have a paper. You don't have an outline. You don't have a contour of a program. You have not thought through anything. You have not spoken to states. You have not shared your concerns with insurance companies. You have not got any quotes. Yet you go and announce something and say, and what is the word? You said this is the world's largest funded government healthcare program. This is the world's largest unfunded program. Why didn't you say that?
But ministers in the Modi cabinet say, and a lot of them argue, that the kind of premiums that the Congress party is calculating, or the numbers that you're projecting, are obviously very high. They expect premiums to be taken care of volumes and by competition.
Please understand one thing. If premiums are low, then the coverage is going to be low.
Yes.
The number of illnesses, diseases that will be covered will be fewer. The number of procedures that will be covered will be fewer. And it will also mean that the access to this will become more difficult. They will make access more difficult, therefore fewer people claim it.
I'll ask you a quick thing on the markets, and I will ask you on LTCG. Are you opposed to the LTCG tax that has been imposed? Because I was interviewing former Finance Minister Yashwant Sinha, and he said he was not on principle on board with this because markets are very thin and profit margins are.
You see, it depends on the context. At a certain level of GDP, at a certain level of per capita income, at a certain level of public participation in the equity market, in principle, I do not think one can oppose a long-term capital gain. But if you want the equity market to deepen, if you want rural India to invest in equity, which is risk capital, providing risk capital, you have to encourage participation in the equity market. In fact, between urban and rural India, urban India's proportion has fallen by 2.5%. Rural India, second tier and third tier towns' participation has increased by about 2.5%.
Right.
I would not oppose LTCG in principle, but I would seriously question whether this was the year in which you should introduce LTCG.
But what is wrong with this year? Because there has to, exemption for the wealthiest goes against the very grain of democracy.
Don't give me,
I will
don't
tell
give
you
me
why.
lectures about
I will
equity.
tell you why.
Don't give me lectures about
Why
equity.
should governments of the day be worried
Why
about...
didn't you do it 2 years ago then? You thought 2 years ago
Because we
was...
signed the deal with Mauritius, the time was perhaps right.
Why
and this
didn't-
has been done in a... But do you concede that this has been done in a non-disruptive sort of a way?
We don't know. The market was disrupted the next day.
But that could be... that had a lot to do with bond yields as well. That spiked by
Could be, I don't know.
76%.
So why do you say call it non-disruptive? The market fell 800 points. Remember, we've already got a report which says you can get over the LTCG by going to a couple of other countries in Europe now because of the treaties. I'm not sure, unless I see all the treaties, unless I see all the current bilateral treaties, I won't be able to say that. Is this the right year to introduce LTCG? I think the jury's out. But I think there are a lot of voices which say this is not the right time to introduce LTCG.
Hasmukh Adhia in a conversation with some of us did say very categorically that one of the reasons why the government has looked at bringing about the LTCG is to temper the exuberance in the markets. He believes there was a lot of irrational exuberance that needed to be tempered with.
I don't think it's the business of government to temper exuberance in the market. The business of government is to lay down policy and run the government. Whether the market is exuberant or not, the market will decide.
I think one of the reasons why people are talking about irrational exuberance is that a lot of retail investors have come back to the markets and they could have suffered a lot if there were to be a very big crash. I'm presuming they suffered even on Friday, but...
I've also heard voices from the government which said that there are no asset bubbles that have built up in our 4-year tenure. They've said that also. I don't know.
Do you believe, though, that this government has been able to blunt the whole Soot Boot Ki Sarkar narrative? They haven't done much for the big businesses. They're obviously grouchy. They believe in a quest to incentivize and encourage MSMEs. The big guys have been left in the lurch. They haven't got the corporate tax cuts. They've gone ahead and imposed an LTCG. Do you believe they've narrated this whole, they've blunted the whole narrative that, your party had leveled against them, the whole Soot Boot Ki Sarkar?
I don't know if you go by the Rajasthan and West Bengal results. Remember, we converted a deficit of 2,26,000 to a surplus of 1,90,000. That kind of swings don't take place. The poor of Rajasthan, and there are very poor people in Rajasthan, the poor of Rajasthan, on the day the budget was presented, gave a resounding vote of no confidence in the Modi government. But I don't think they've blunted it. You see, they trumpeted demonetization, an utter disaster. They trumpeted demonetization and tried to sell it as a rich versus poor issue. If every economic decision is presented as rich versus poor, you sort of stoke class envy and class prejudices. That's not the way to run an economy.
But I'll ask you a last question, and this has to do with your party president's Bas Ek Saal jibe that the Congress party seems to have caught on, which is, I'm sure you understand Bas Ek Saal jibe. Yes. What does one make of that jibe? Is the Congress party telling people that we're prepared to be back in government?
I had something similar when I made my statement. I said,
thank God
this is the last budget of this government, and thank God for that. You had an economy that had a momentum behind it. Even according to your own numbers, 6.4% in the last year of UPA, rising to 7.5, rising to 8. It's since been revised to 8.2.
Yeah.
You had a momentum. You had a bonanza through the crude oil prices. You had a momentum. And you had a leader who had the capacity to communicate, articulate. You blew all that away. You blew all that away in a matter of 2 years. So I'm very sad. I mean, you blew this opportunity away.
So given the scenario that you're talking about, and given the fact that every $20 increase, according to the economic survey, in crude oil will affect GDP growth by 60 basis points.
Every $10 increase.
Every $10. Where do you see growth settle for next year? They're talking about levels of 7 to 7.5%.
We're talking about 17, 18 or 18, 19?
18, 19.
Well, I think 17, 18 will settle at 6.5 or below. First half was 6, and the second half cannot be 7
7.5.
or certainly more than 7. Even if it is 7, this year will settle at 6.5.
Okay.
Next year, with some luck, if they don't advance elections, if they don't commit other demonetization-like disasters, growth could pick up from 6.5, say, closer to 7.
But given the tone and the tenor of the budget and the by-polls in Rajasthan, is there a concern that elections could be advanced to 2018 itself?
Well, that's a call that the Prime Minister has to take. Well, I know one thing. If anyone was thinking of a May 2018 election, that is over. May 2018 election, that's over. That's blown to the pieces by Rajasthan and West Bengal. The next window now is November 2018, when Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, etc. go to polls. It's quite possible. But whether it's November 2018 or May 2019, I think the NDA government is a boat whose sails have no wind in it now.
If I may ask you a last question, I'll ask you to be candid here. We've criticized the budget over the last half an hour. Is there nothing that you like in this budget at all?
Oh, of course. Every budget will have...
what are the 3 things that you like about this budget?
Well, I haven't read every line of the budget, but I'm happy that they have kept the Maganrega allocation at the same level, because I think farm distress will continue this year, and therefore Maganrega must be protected. I'm happy they've not made many major cuts, although I have listed 7 or 8 programs where they have made marginal cuts in allocation. There are some good things. They're talking about institutes of excellence. They're talking about Udan program, connecting 2-tier and 3-tier towns. They're talking about 1 billion landings and takeoffs in airports, which means the middle class can also travel by air. Every budget, however incompetent one is, every budget will have a few nuggets, isn't it?
On that note, sir, thanks very much for speaking to us right here at TT Now.